Lakshmi sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the dusty road that led out of their small town. It was late afternoon, and the sky above Madurai burned a soft orange, like the inside of a dream. The old fan above her creaked slowly, slicing the thick summer air. Outside, children laughed as they chased kites across open fields. But inside, the silence wrapped itself around her like a weight she had carried for years. She folded the letter one last time, her hands trembling slightly. The paper was worn at the edges, not from age, but from hesitation. She had rewritten it 3 times already, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she feared how it might be received. Dear respected sir, my name is Lakshmi. I am a mother, a teacher, and a citizen of this beautiful country. I write not for myself, but for those children whose dreams are being buried under the weight of their hunger, their poverty, and their silence. Her husband had read the draft in silence the night before. He didn't say much, only placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded. He knew her well. He knew she didn't write letters for attention. She wrote because something inside her refused to settle for less than change. That year, her son Sundar was just 17, tall, soft-spoken, and endlessly curious. He often returned home with questions that school couldn't answer. He built things out of scraps, talked about radios and wires, as if they were living things. But Lakshmi saw the shadows behind his eyes too. He wanted more, but, in a world that rarely looked beyond wealth and connection, wanting was not enough. Double quotes, AMMA, Sundar said as he stepped into the room, wiping sweat from his brow. You're still holding that letter? Lakshmi turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Yes, I was thinking of posting it tomorrow. He sat beside her, eyes drifting over the paper. Do you really think he'll read it? She smiled gently, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Maybe he won't, but someone will. And sometimes, all it takes is one person with power to listen for things to start changing. Sundar didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked at hurriedly, looked at this woman who had never stood on a stage, never held a microphone, and never had her name in a newspaper. And yet, she had taught entire generations under a leaking roof with only a chalkboard and her will. If anyone can make him listen, he said finally, it's you. Lakshmi didn't post the letter the next day. Instead, she placed it inside a tin box along with her husband's watch, a few old school photos, and a stack of certificates her students had given her over the years. She thought she'd wait for the right moment, but the moment never came. Months passed, then years. Sundar went off to college on a scholarship no one expected him to win. Lakshmi watched from the bus stop, tears in her eyes as his figure grew smaller in the distance. She didn't wave. She simply held the box tighter in her arms. He called every Sunday, told her about professors, strange food, and how he missed her. But he never told her about the nights he stayed up reading in libraries because he couldn't afford his own books. He didn't tell her about the interviews he walked into with torn shoes, or the companies that didn't even look at his resume. He wanted to protect her. But Lakshmi already knew. One night, she sat on the rooftop, watching the stars. Her husband had passed away the year before, and the house felt too quiet without his humming. She thought about the letter again, about the man she had written to. Narendra Modi had just become the chief minister of Gujarat when she wrote that letter. Now, he was leading the entire country. She wondered if he ever received it, or if it had disappeared like the voices of millions who asked, pleaded, and begged for someone to hear them. But then something happened. One morning, Sundar called. His voice was different, calmer, steadier, as if something inside him had finally clicked into place. Amma, he said, I got the job. What job? She asked, already sitting upright. Google, he whispered. In America. Lakshmi said nothing at first. She simply pressed her hand to her chest and closed her eyes. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude. Not because her son had made it, but because he hadn't let the world harden him. He still believed. He still dreamed. And that dream now had a name. Later that day, she pulled out the tin box again, unfolded the letter one more time. The paper had yellowed, the ink had faded slightly, but the words still burned, still mattered. This time she didn't hesitate. She posted the letter not to complain, but to remind the world that every success story begins somewhere small, somewhere overlooked. Sometimes, even with a mother sitting by a window, whispering hopes into the wind, and even if no one read it, she had done her part, because change doesn't always start with power. Sometimes, it starts with love. The weeks after Sundar's call passed in slow waves. Lakshmi's neighbors began to stop her in the market, at the temple, even outside the school gate. "Your son is in America now," one asked, with wonder in her voice. "He works for that big company, what is it? Goggle?" Another tried to pronounce, laughing. Lakshmi only nodded, her smile soft, her eyes calm. Inside, her heart swelled with quiet joy, but she never let it rise too high. She had lived long enough to know that pride is loud, but dignity is silent. Each evening, she would sit on the porch with her tea, the sun setting behind her, and she would remember how far they had come. Not just Sundar but all of them. The broken bicycles, the power cuts during his exams, the days he came home hungry but still full of questions. She remembered the day he built a working radio out of spare parts and a spoon. He was only 12, but what touched her most wasn't the job, the salary, or even the title. It was the way he still ended every call with, "Did you eat, Uma?" Miles away, Sundar struggled to adapt to a new land. The streets were clean, the buildings tall, and the silence strange. People smiled politely, but did not linger. They worked hard, but rarely asked how you really were. He missed the noise, the shared tiffins, the temple bells in the morning. But most of all, he missed his mother's voice echoing from the kitchen, calling him in when he stayed out too long. Yet, he pushed forward. He worked longer hours than anyone else, not because he wanted to impress, but because he knew what it had cost for him to be there. He remembered his mother drying old notebooks in the sun so he could reuse them. He remembered his father walking him 5 kilometers to school during the floods. He carried those memories like armor one evening. After a long meeting, Sundar walked into his small apartment and saw the envelope on his desk. It had the Indian government stamp on it. At first, he thought it might be some official formality. But when he opened it, he froze. Inside was a scanned image of a handwritten letter, his mother's letter, the one she had written to the Prime Minister years ago. Attached was a note from a young officer in Delhi who had found it in an old records folder marked Unprocessed Appeals. She had read it during her lunch break, and something in it had made her cry. "I don't know if this letter ever reached anyone," the note said, "but I thought you should have a copy. The handwriting matches your mother's name and address. Thank you for making her words come true." Sundar held the paper gently, as if it might disappear. The words were faded, but her voice rang clear in his heart. Each line was like a lullaby of truth. "Dear respected sir, I ask not for help, but for attention. Not for charity, but for understanding. If our leaders could visit our schools, sit with our children, hear their dreams, perhaps they would remember what this country truly needs." ... He read the letter twice, then a third time. His throat tightened. In that moment, all his meetings, deadlines, and job titles faded. He wasn't a Google employee. He was just Lakshmi's son, and she had planted the seed long before. He even knew what a keyboard was. He called her that night. The time difference made it early morning in India. She picked up quickly, worried. "Sundar, are you all right?" He didn't speak right away. "Amma," he whispered finally, "I read your letter." She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, she asked, "Which one?" "The one you wrote to the Prime Minister." Lakshmi chuckled, not out of amusement, but out of memory. "Oh, that old thing. "It's not old," he said. "It's eternal." For a few seconds there was just silence between them. A kind of silence that held 1,000 stories. "Someone found it," he continued. "Sent it to me. Said your words made her cry." Lakshmi said nothing. Then she spoke, slowly, carefully. "I didn't write it to be read, Sundar. I wrote it so I wouldn't forget what matters." Tears rolled down his cheeks before he could stop them. He didn't know why. Maybe because he missed her. Maybe because he realized how much of his strength came from someone who had never stood in the spotlight. "Uma," he said quietly, "you were right. Everything you said in that letter, it's still true." Lakshmi, sitting alone in her kitchen, closed her eyes. "Then make it matter, Sundar. Don't just build for the world. Build for the ones who are still waiting to be seen." He nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I will." After the call ended, Sundar sat alone for a long time. Outside, the American night was still. Inside, his soul was loud. The next morning, he walked into a team meeting and asked if anyone had ever heard of a school without electricity. When they looked puzzled, he smiled gently. A year had passed since Sundar had read his mother's letter. He kept a copy of it pinned to the inside of his wardrobe door, right next to a photo of his parents on their wedding day. Every morning, before he left for work, he would glance at it, not to remind himself of where he came from. He had never forgotten that, but to remember why he started. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the city still slept, he often sat by the window and thought of the cracked walls of their school building, of children sitting on the floor because there weren't enough desks, of students sharing one textbook among 5, and yet, still learning, still hoping. His success had become a story, printed in newspapers, told on television. People called him a symbol of India's potential, but Sundar knew the truth. He wasn't the story, Lakshmi was. His mother had done something few could understand. In a world that chased noise, she had chosen silence, not weakness, not fear, but a silence full of strength, a silence that built futures with chalk and broken windows and hope. And now, he felt her silence urging him to act. That winter, Sundar proposed a quiet project at his company, something small, not about products, not about profits, but about people. He called it the Home Initiative. The idea was simple: identify schools in forgotten areas, listen to their needs, and give them tools, not charity, but dignity. "We don't build schools," he told his team. "We help them rebuild themselves." Some executives raised concerns. It was outside their core business. It wouldn't make headlines. It wouldn't increase shareholder value. But Sundar didn't flinch. "Then let's do it anyway." The first school they chose was not in Delhi or Mumbai. It was in a village in Tamil Nadu, only a few miles from Madras. Sundar didn't tell anyone why he picked that one. He just smiled and said, "It feels right." Meanwhile, Lakshmi continued her quiet life. She still taught part-time, though the walk tired her more now. She wore her husband's old shawl and carried a tiffin box wrapped in newspaper. She didn't own a smartphone. She didn't have a bank app. But when her students read out loud, her face lit up like the morning sun. One afternoon, her principal approached her with a strange expression. "Lakshmi, madam," he said, holding a letter. "We've received a message from a team working with your son's company. They want to visit. They say you inspired something." Lakshmi blinked, unsure how to respond. "Me, yes. They say it started with a letter, a very old one." She sat down slowly, her breath caught in her chest. All these years, the letter had lived in her memory. Now, it had found its way back through people she'd never met. The visit was quiet, just as Sundar intended. No cameras, no big announcements. The team listened more than they spoke. They asked the teachers what they needed. They asked the children what they dreamed of. Lakshmi stayed in the background, watching. When they offered her a seat at the front, she shook her head. "Let them speak," she said. I've said enough in that letter. But one young engineer insisted. He said he had joined the company because of Sundar's journey, and that journey, he believed, had started with her. Read your letter, madam, he said softly. It reminded me of my own mother. Lakshmi looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Then don't forget it, she said. Most things in life are forgotten, but not the truth. Back in America, Sundar received a message from the same engineer that night. She said very little. The note read, "But it changed something in me." Sundar smiled. His mother had always known when to speak, and when to let silence do the work. A few months later, the school received new desks, a reliable water supply, solar-powered fans, and a digital board for the first time. But more than that, they received attention. Someone had listened. Someone had cared. Lakshmi walked into the upgraded classroom one morning and paused. The children were laughing. The walls were painted. The chalk didn't break in half when she wrote. She stood there for a long time. Then she whispered, finally. That evening, she took out her diary and wrote only one line. Even silence has a voice. Someone chooses to hear it. The year Sundar was invited to an international technology conference in Singapore, he almost didn't go. It wasn't that he was ungrateful. He had always believed in sharing knowledge, but something inside him had shifted. The spotlight no longer excited him. He preferred quiet rooms, honest conversations, and the kind of work that didn't need applause. But when he saw the speaker list, something caught his attention. One of the closing keynotes was titled, "The Teachers Who Shaped Our World." He called the organizers. "Can I bring a guest?" he asked. "Of course," they said. "Family?" He paused. "Yes, someone very special." A week later, Lakshmi stood barefoot inside Chennai International Airport, clutching a small bag and a boarding pass with her name printed in English. She had never left India before. She had never even stepped inside a plane. "Amma," Sundar said, holding her hand gently, "you don't need to speak. You don't need to perform. Just be there." She looked at him with quiet eyes. "I'm not afraid. I just hope I remember to breathe." The flight was long, and Sundar stayed beside her the entire time, explaining the seatbelt, the food, the soft light above their heads. When they landed, Lakshmi looked out the window at the city lights and said softly, "This looks like a dream." The next morning, she dressed in a simple cotton sari white with a green border. She wore no jewelry. She didn't need any. Her presence alone spoke volumes. The auditorium was filled with leaders, engineers, researchers, and students from around the world. Sundar gave his speech with ease, sharing his journey, his lessons, and the challenges ahead. But as he reached the end, he stopped. His voice grew quieter. "I have spoken enough about innovation," he said. "Now let me speak about foundation." He gestured to the side of the stage. "There's someone here today who never asked for recognition. Someone who worked in silence so that I could find my voice. Please welcome my mother, Lakshmi." For a moment, the hall was still. Then applause broke out, not loud or forced, but warm, rising like sunlight after rain. Lakshmi stepped onto the stage, unsure of her steps, but steady in her spirit. Sundar offered her his arm, but she shook her head and walked on her own. When she reached the microphone, she didn't speak at first. She looked out at the audience, then turned slightly, toward her son. "I didn't teach him computers," she said quietly. "I didn't understand half the things he built, but I taught him to notice when someone has less, to listen when someone is silent, and to act when something is wrong." She looked back at the crowd. "That's enough for me." After the session, a young girl from Vietnam approached her with tears in her eyes. She spoke slowly, carefully. "My mother is a teacher too," she said, "but no one sees her." Lakshmi took her hands and replied, "They will. Maybe not today, but one day, someone will see her the way you do, and that will be enough." Later that evening, Sundar and Lakshmi sat together on the hotel balcony, watching the city below. Double quotes AMMA, he said softly. Do you remember the letter? Which one? She smiled, knowing exactly which. The one you wrote before I even dreamed of Google. Lakshmi nodded, her eyes distant. I think, Sundar continued, we should share it, publicly, not for praise, but because maybe, somewhere, another child is waiting for someone to believe in them. Lakshmi was silent for a long moment. Then, she said, if you believe it will help someone, then yes. Let the letter fly. And so it did. The letter was published in a popular magazine under the title, A Mother's Message to a Future She May Never See. It was simple, emotional, and honest, and it was read by millions. Teachers across India printed it and read it to their students. Parents folded it into lunchboxes. Young people shared it online with captions like, "This reminds me of my mother." But perhaps the most surprising response came from New Delhi. One morning, a brown envelope arrived at Lakshmi's doorstep. Inside was a formal invitation. Dear Lakshmi Pichai, you are invited as a guest of honor at the National Teachers Recognition Ceremony in Delhi. Your letter moved our hearts. We wish to honor not only your words, but your years of silent service. Signed, the Office of the Prime Minister. Lakshmi sat very still, the paper trembling in her hands. Sundar, standing nearby, didn't speak. She looked up at him, a strange smile on her face. I wrote to him once, long ago, maybe now. He has finally read it. The morning of the ceremony, Delhi's air felt unusually calm. The sun rose behind India Gate with a slow golden pride. Schoolchildren in pressed uniforms walked hand in hand through the garden paths. Flagpoles fluttered in the wind. Guards in crisp uniforms stood outside the large hall where the event was to be held. Inside the hotel, Lakshmi sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Her sari was soft blue, with a silver border simple, like always. A pair of white jasmine flowers rested in her braid, the same way she wore them when she first started teaching at the village school. Sundar sat beside her, tying the strings of his formal kurta. He kept glancing at her reflection in the mirror. Oma, he said, voice gentle, are you nervous? Lakshmi didn't answer right away. Then she looked at him and smiled. Not nervous, she said. Grateful. I never imagined this. Not in my lifetime. As they entered the grand hall, a wave of silence passed over the room. Ministers, journalists, educators, and students all turned to look. Some recognized her face from the article. Others had read her letter and memorized its lines. But most simply felt something they could not name a presence. Quiet but powerful. An usher led them to the front row. When the announcer stepped up to the podium, the room stilled again. Today, he began, we honor many great teachers from across the country. But there is one guest whose words have reminded us why teaching is not just a profession, it is a path. He paused, lifting a printed copy of her letter. Before we invite her to the stage, let me read a few lines. His voice carried across the hall. If our leaders could sit among our children, even for a day, perhaps they would no longer speak only of data and schemes. Perhaps they would remember that before a nation can rise, its children must first be fed, heard, and taught to dream. As he read, Lakshmi closed her eyes. She remembered writing those words late at night, after a student fainted from hunger during class. She remembered standing outside the government office for hours just to ask for extra chalk. She remembered the children who never returned after their fathers lost their jobs. Please welcome, the announcer said, Lakshmi Pichai. As she stepped onto the stage, applause rose, not thunderous, not staged, but honest. A wave of hands clapping, not for fame, but for truth. She took the microphone slowly. I am not used to speaking to so many people, she said. I spent most of my life speaking to just 20 or 30 children at a time, but each of them was the whole world to me. The room grew quiet again. I don't have big ideas to share, she continued. Just one simple truth. If we wait for permission to change things, we'll wait forever. But if we begin where we are, with what we have, that's enough. She paused, her voice steady. I wrote that letter because I was tired of waiting. I didn't think anyone would read it. I just wanted to feel like I had spoken. Then, she looked toward the front row, where the Prime Minister sat. And now, years later, the country listened. After she stepped down, the Prime Minister himself stood. He approached her with folded hands, a gesture of deep respect. He didn't speak into the mic. Instead, he leaned slightly and whispered, "Your letter taught me more than many speeches ever could." He then handed her a small, carved plaque, in honor of voices that never gave up. After the ceremony, reporters flooded Sundar with questions. How does it feel to see your mother honored like this? What part of her letter changed your life? Did you expect this recognition? But Sundar, who had stood on global stages, launched projects across continents, and given interviews to international networks, only said one thing. She's been changing lives long before anyone knew my name. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the parliament buildings, Lakshmi and Sundar sat together on a quiet bench in Lodi Garden. Children were playing nearby. Birds circled above them, double quotes, AMMA, he said softly. Today, you were India's teacher. Lakshmi smiled and shook her head. No, Sundar. Today, India became my classroom. She looked up at the sky, as if speaking to someone far away. And I think your father would have liked the lesson. Months passed after the award ceremony, but Lakshmi returned to her village life, as if nothing had changed. The old school was still there, with its squeaky gate and mango tree in the courtyard. She still woke before sunrise, swept the veranda, and drank her tea on the porch. People now greeted her with more warmth, some with shy smiles, others with folded hands. But Lakshmi didn't seek attention. She had always believed that teaching was like planting seeds. You do it with care, with patience. You may never see the tree, but you plant anyway. Yet something was changing not around her, but within others. Young teachers began writing to her. They sent letters, voice notes, and drawings made by their students. One girl from Jharkhand wrote, "Madam, I had given up on teaching because no one listened, but your letter reminded me why I started." Lakshmi read each one. She never replied, in long sentences. Just a few words each time. Keep going. You are enough. They will remember you. One day, a stranger came to visit her school. She was young, confident, dressed in simple clothes, but with eyes full of purpose. She introduced herself as an education volunteer from a northern district. "Madam," she said, "I started a reading club because of your speech. We have 70 children now. We named the library after you." Lakshmi blinked, stunned. "But why me?" The girl smiled. "Because someone like you showed us what's possible when you write a letter no one expects to be answered." That evening, Sundar called. He had just finished a talk at a university in London, where he had quoted her letter once again. He was now leading a new global project that brought low-cost internet and digital tools to rural communities, not just in India, but in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. "It all goes back to your words, Oma," he said. "You taught me to see those no one sees." Lakshmi was quiet, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me one thing, Sundar," she said. "Never forget where you were when the world didn't know your name." "I promise," he replied. Years passed. Lakshmi grew older. Her hair turned silver, and her steps slowed, but her eyes never lost their fire. Her letter had been translated into 11 languages. It was now part of teacher training programs. Even schools in other countries used it to teach students about empathy and leadership. Still, she never saw herself as famous, only useful then. One monsoon morning, the school bell rang, as usual. Children rushed through the puddles. Inside the staff room, Lakshmi sat with her old shawl, and a cup of warm tea. A small girl peeked through the door and tiptoed in. "Madame," she said, holding out a folded sheet of paper, "I wrote something." Lakshmi opened it slowly. It was a drawing of a teacher under a tree, reading a book to children sitting in a circle. Underneath, in neat handwriting, the girl had written, "One day, I will be like you." Lakshmi didn't cry. She just smiled and looked out the window at the rain. She didn't need another award. She had received the only one that mattered. A few weeks later, Lakshmi's health began to decline. The villagers gathered quietly outside her home, lighting candles, bringing food, offering help. People came from other towns, 2 former students, young educators, and even strangers who had been touched by her words. Sundar flew home immediately. He sat beside her bedside, holding her hand as she rested. "Oma," he whispered, "you changed the world." Lakshmi opened her eyes slowly. Her voice was faint. "No," she said. "I just believed in it." That night, Lakshmi passed away, peacefully, surrounded by those who loved her. No fanfare, no headlines, just the kind of farewell she would have wanted, gentle, grateful, and full of grace. A few days later, Sundar stood once again at the same school, now repainted, full of light. He looked out at a crowd of students, teachers, and villagers. "My mother didn't just raise me," he said. "She raised hope. She proved that you don't need power to make change. Just the courage to speak even if you think no one is listening." He reached into his pocket and pulled out her letter. "This," he said, "was the beginning, and we are its future." In that moment, the wind rustled through the trees, as if even the earth paused to remember. Lakshmi had written one letter, and in doing so, she had written a legacy. Months after Lakshmi's passing, her village school built a quiet corner under the old mango tree. It wasn't a statue, nor a big mural, just a stone bench and a glass frame hanging above it. Inside the frame was the handwritten letter, the original one she had written years ago, never expecting anyone would read it. Below the letter, engraved in Tamil and English, were the words, "For the teacher who spoke softly and moved mountains." Children sat there every morning before class. They read her words aloud. Some didn't understand every line, but they understood the feeling. They knew she had loved them long before they were born. One evening, a little boy named Rishi sat on that bench, holding a pencil with bite marks on it. He read the letter slowly, syllable by syllable. When he finished, he looked at the sky and whispered, "I want to write letters too." A teacher nearby overheard him and asked, "What would you write?" "I'd write to the chief minister," Rishi said confidently, "and tell him we still don't have a science lab." The teacher chuckled, but her eyes filled with tears, because Lakshmi's letter had done something rare. It hadn't ended. It had become part of people. A quiet rebellion passed down through simple words, good hearts, and unshaken belief back in the city. Sundar had settled into a rhythm of work, travel, and quiet reflection. But something was missing. Something he couldn't define, until one day, he visited a school in Uttar Pradesh. The headmistress handed him a folder full of essays. "Our students wrote these after reading your mother's letter," she said. Sundar opened one and read, "Dear Prime Minister, my school is small, but our dreams are big. My mother sweeps the floor here. My teacher says I can become someone. I want to believe her. Please, help us believe." He read another, then another. That evening, in the car, he opened his phone and drafted a message to his team. "We've built products. Now let's build voices." In the following months, his company launched an online platform that allowed children from rural and remote areas to write letters to government officials, school boards, and education leaders. Each letter was gently reviewed, translated, if needed, and delivered to the right place with care. They called it the Lakshmi Initiative. Within the first year, over 100,000 letters were written. Many were about books, some were about water, others were about broken roofs, missing teachers, or dreams of becoming astronauts. A minister in Kerala read one letter from a child in a tribal village and traveled 3 hours on foot just to meet her. He returned and sanctioned funds to rebuild her school. When asked why, he said, "Her words reminded me of someone, a teacher who once wrote a letter no one heard. Now I'm listening." As for Sundar, he never stopped quoting his mother's words. In speeches, articles, podcasts, her sentences found their way in. And one day, during a live interview with a journalist in America, he was asked, if you could give one message to young people, what would it be? He paused, then he said quietly, "Write the letter, even if you think no one will read it." The journalist looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" Sundar smiled. "My mother wrote a letter. Not for power, not for reward, but because she cared. And because of that one letter, the lives of millions have changed. So yes, write the letter. Speak the truth. Tell your story. Someone, somewhere, will hear you." The video went viral. Teachers began playing it in classrooms across countries. Parents sent it to their children. And slowly young voices rose not in anger, but in belief. Lakshmi's letter had traveled without wings, had touched hearts without borders, had lived beyond her breath. And one morning, years later, a girl named Priya stood on the same stage in Singapore where Lakshmi once stood beside Sundar. Priya was from a fishing village in Orissa. Her school had no internet when she was a child. Now, she was leading a science mission at a major research center. When asked what inspired her journey, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of Lakshmi's letter. "I keep it with me," she said, her voice trembling, "because this is the voice that told me I mattered." The audience rose in silence, not for fame, not for performance, but for a mother who once sat by a window in Madurai, folded a simple page, and wrote, "I ask not for help, but for attention, not for charity, but for understanding. If our leaders could sit among our children, even for a day." She never finished that sentence, because now the world was finishing it for her.